to empower human flourishing. And we picked this from a quote that particularly is one of my favourite quotes. So whenever I start a new term, I like to read it to myself and remind myself of it. And the quote is, "I have come to the frightening conclusion that I am the decisive element in the classroom. It is my personal approach that creates the climate. It is my daily mood that makes the weather. As a teacher, I possess a tremendous power to make a child's life miserable or joyous. I can be a tool of torture or an instrument of inspiration. I can humiliate or heal. In all situations, it is my response that decides whether a crisis will be escalated or de-escalated and a child humanized or dehumanized." I think I just love this reminder of the power that each and every one of us have. And this is not just about classrooms, but in our teams, in our families, to create the climate, to create the weather. And I think we all want to create climates where we flourish and those around us can flourish. And we're not going to give you a super easy answer, but we'd just love to kind of open up this topic together, have a look at some of the research, and hopefully help each other to create more of these climates for flourishing. But Katy, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions to start with, having given you that quote. So this title is "How do we create and empower human flourishing?" But what is human flourishing, and why is that the end goal? Is that the right end goal?
Oh, thank you so much, Emmie. I absolutely love that question, and it's really, really challenging as well. Human flourishing is deeply complex and it's really individual, so it's hugely subjective as well, because what makes me flourish is definitely going to be different to what makes Katy flourish or Claire flourish or Emmie flourish. And so it's really, really important to know people really deeply. But there are some commonalities, because the same things that enable humans to flourish tends to be able to, you can tend to group them into a few things. Certainly we do want subjective well-being, we want those hedonistic aspects, we want to feel joy, we want to feel happy, we want to have quite a low stress life as well, which makes quite a difference. So that's our kind of subjective well-being, and you can measure that. You can ask people to rate that, and they're starting to do some really cool neuroscience as well, and some really interesting work with hormones too. And you can actually measure hormone levels and compare that with how people are feeling. So you're getting more objective levels on that. But that's not the end of the story. The subjective well-being is definitely not where it stops. Because flourishing is more than that. It's also deeply about human relationships and having positive relationships. And I think you absolutely can't flourish without human relationships. I just don't think that's possible. Again, you can look at relationships and see how positive they are, how connected people feel, how much they feel part of a community. Do they have someone that they could call at 3 o'clock in the morning who they know would pick up the phone and help them, whatever that was? So again, you can measure that aspect of flourishing, but it's really important to consider that actually what makes a great relationship for me might make it very different, might be very different for someone like you, or maybe Granville would have a different idea of what makes a great relationship. So again, whilst there are commonalities, it's also quite individual, which really, really means know your people really well. Other things that scientists and researchers will talk about with flourishing is, do you have a sense of meaning and purpose in your life? And as you can see, these are connected, because when we feel like we're contributing to something bigger than ourselves, we feel more joy, we feel fulfilled, and that increases our subjective well-being. We're much more likely to feel meaning and purpose in our lives if we're doing something as part of a community and if we're doing it in relationship. So actually doing something on your own tends to give you less of a sense of meaning and purpose than if you're doing it as part of a community or for a community. So you can see how all of these things are beautifully intertwined. Autonomy, humans love to feel a sense of self-efficacy, and they love to be empowered and believed in and given that autonomy. But again, it's very, very individual, because some people need a lot more support than others, and it's also context specific, because I might want total autonomy in one area, but in another area I might actually want a lot of support. So again, it's a very nuanced thing, this flourishing business, which makes it endlessly fascinating. I definitely want to be researching it. until the moment I'm kind of put into my coffin or whatever. But that's really exciting. And there are some other things as well, like optimism is really important, growth and mastery, which we're very relieved about being in education, because actually when people feel a sense of growth or moving towards mastery, that also helps their flourishing, and it's a really important part of it. But again, that happens much more effectively in relationships. So that was a rather convoluted answer to your question. I'm so sorry, Emmie.
Not at all. I think one of the criticisms sometimes of the kind of whole flourishing agenda, and certainly one of the things I've had to wrestle with, is are we just kind of trying to make everybody happy? And is that the right thing? Should we be aiming for goodness or virtue or character? There's endless suffering in the world, and we've just been talking about kind of suffering from climate change. It's kind of just making people feel happy, the right end goal. And I think what you're saying is that flourishing in and of itself is not just that subjective happiness, it's this bigger picture of kind of well-being, which includes, I think, character, it includes virtue, it includes purpose and meaning and goodness, not just that kind of momentary happiness.
Not at all. And you're so right, Emmie, to bring that up. And actually, it's an area we've both been really excited about, because being virtuous and having good character actually enables so many of those other factors, because it's really hard to have great relationships if you're not honest, if you're not kind, if you're not loving. So actually that really supports that. It's really hard to grow if you don't have the virtues of hard work and kind of motivation. So actually good character, we're finding more and more, absolutely underpins flourishing. And it's really important for us, particularly when we think about this in a kind of leadership concept, also to think about our own character growth and enabling the character growth of the people that we're lucky enough to work with, whether that's teaching students in a classroom or other adults or whatever context, or in our parenting and raising our children, or in whatever workplace we're in. I think there's a huge role for character, and we're seeing that emerge really in the research as well. So Oxford Character Project based at Oxford University are now talking very deeply with the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard University, because they know that the two are absolutely intertwined and integral with each other.
And we know that instinctively, I think,
Definitely,
don't we? That
definitely.
You don't give them what they want to make them happy in the moment, but you
Yes.
resilience. But you mentioned the research, and I think one of the things I wanted us to talk about tonight is kind of how good is the research in this area.
Yes.
Not that we want to kind of throw research at everyone in the room, but it's nice to know if what we're doing is actually embedded in decent research or not. And I think we both brought a couple of kind of papers along just to kind of have a look. Particularly someone called Tyler Van der Wheeler has been doing kind of a lot in this area. There's a lot of this is activities for flourishing, an evidence-based guide. So a lot of papers being published in the Positive Psychology and Wellbeing Journal, Journal for Preventative Medicine, looking at kind of what actually makes a difference in this area, which interventions actually work. And so it's pretty good, the kind of research that's out there. I don't know if you want to comment on that, having done a PhD in that.
That's so kind. Yeah, I think that the research is advancing really quickly. And what's really exciting is the interdisciplinary research, because people in philosophy and ethics are talking to people in psychology, and people in the sciences, so working in biology and neuroscience, they want to talk to the philosophers and the ethicists as well. And they want to talk to business school, and business school wants to talk to them as well. So I think that's the most exciting area of research. It's this idea that everyone's kind of coming together with the same goal of human flourishing, and actually they're really talking to each other now. And I think that's more recent. So for example, the Human Flourishing Program's only been open for a couple of years now, and that just shows, and that's an interdisciplinary initiative at Harvard. The Oxford University Wellbeing Research Centre, again, is led by an economist, interestingly, and that's only been open for 3 years now. So you can actually see that it's a real growth area, which I think is really, really exciting. Again, it's difficult because it is subjective, but there are objective measures that when you take a lot of them and bring it all together, it kind of works.
Brilliant. And I guess we're going to pitch this as kind of creating the climate, creating the weather. I think most of us find it quite easy to buy that leaders can create the weather. And certainly McKinsey did a really interesting study on this, and like the huge power that leaders have over the well-being of people in their teams. It's just kind of blows you away how significant that is. But what about if we're kind of not in leadership positions? To what extent do we all have the power to creates the climate and the weather.
Absolutely. It's actually incredible how much power we do have, because every single time that we interact with someone, we have the possibility of either lifting them up and making them feel really good, making them feel valued, making them feel a part of things, part of our community, or we can quash them. And actually, we don't need to be in a position of power to do that. I mean, interestingly, leaders do have more impact on that because people look to their leaders. And actually, they've done some quite interesting studies on where people's attention is focused. And actually, it is more on the leader. And also, they do have power over your career, over your pay, over your working conditions. So actually, leaders do have a big influence. But actually, everybody can be that leader because everybody has the opportunity to lift people up and to make them feel really valued and part of something.
And that's the kind of area that we're quite passionate about researching, isn't it? We're kind of wrote this book together called Leader, but it's not actually for people in positions of leadership. It's for, because we genuinely believe that everybody can be a leader if you choose to, that leadership is about a choice to step up, to make a positive contribution in the world, whether you're given a title or a position or not, whether you're ever celebrated for it is not really the point. We all get to make that choice of being a leader. But I mean, with all the kind of multitude of research out there, and we've gone through a lot of research on leadership. What we'd love to do today is talk about kind of how do we take that kind of plethora of research and bring it together in a way that we can hold individually and remember and apply, hopefully, in our different situations so that we can actually impact human flourishing. I don't know if you want to start off with talking a little about maybe Google and Project Aristotle to open that up.
Yeah, definitely. We absolutely love this study. It wasn't necessarily based on leaders, it was based on team and team performance. And Google absolutely threw everything at it, as you can imagine. This was a piece of research, they were going to smash it. So whatever you think about Google's ethics or whatever, when they take on research, they really take on research. And so what they wanted was to find out, what is it that makes the perfect team? What makes the most high-performing team? And they were really, really scratching their heads, and it took them a really long time to make any progress whatsoever. They started with what you would think would be quite predictable. So let's look at the IQ of team members. Is it the IQ, the base level intelligence of team members that leads to our highest performing teams? Not at all. Is it the level of experience? Do we want really experienced people together? Or perhaps we want really experienced people with less experienced people. So it's that kind of combination of the new and the more experienced. Wasn't that either. They looked at success. It wasn't success. So if people had been previously successful, it wasn't that. They looked at personalities. They looked at like the big 5 personalities, specifically kind of extrovert, introvert, and it wasn't that either. So they were really kept hitting all of these brick walls, and they were thoroughly confused by it and probably quite frustrated because they were putting a lot of investment into this and quite determined to find out the answer. And then they came across a paper in Science, in the journal Science, and it talked about a collective intelligence of teams. And this is where they actually went, aha, it's not to do with the individuals, it's to do with the group. And that led them on a new path of research, and they figured, oh, it's how people relate to each other. And so this took about 5 years. It was done over 180 different work units. So there are thousands of people involved in this study. And it wasn't any of those things. It was how people related to each other. And that is really, really exciting. And I also think it's quite profound, particularly as educators and as leaders and as parents.
Yeah, and I like the fact that that's where the kind of performance and flourishing come together as well.
Definitely.
That actually when we're talking about kind of climate for human flourishing, that automatically leads to high performance. That's not the reason to do it. It's intrinsically valuable. We ought to be helping each other and those around us in society flourish. But actually, it does make our performance better.
Yes.
There's great kind of research out there, and particularly as leaders, if you can look after your own flourishing, you're then able to kind of create these climates where others can flourish. Whereas if we're in a position where we're kind of fearful and we're anxious, then we're unable to create those relationships that can bring out the best in those around us. But the kind of the model that we've come up with that we'd love to kind of share with you today is the idea that if we want to lead, if we want to lead in a way that lets others flourish around us, we need to first of all know our people, or the people around us, then love those people and then inspire them. So know, love and inspire are the three things for us that really bring together all the research in this area. And I'll just kind of talk a little bit about know. We really believe that kind of knowing people around us is the foundation. And you mentioned this, Katy, because we all experience life differently, we can't treat people in the way they want to be treated. We can't help them if we don't actually know, first of all, who they are, where they're at. And at a deep level, that really means knowing their values. We need to know what's most important to them, what makes them tick. We need to know that so we don't cross their values and actually really cause them harm, but also so we can allow them to live in congruence with those values. I think it's important we know their strengths too. Again, there's a lot of research about actually the best thing we can do to help people enjoy their work and to be their best selves is to kind of play to those strengths, to help them find ways where they can use what they're really good at, to feel they're making a kind of purposeful contribution. And I think both those things we kind of get to using the skills of really listening well and asking great questions, which we can all do. It's just that sometimes we get kind of tired, we get too busy, we just forget how utterly profound it is to give each other time and to genuinely listen and ask great questions.
Definitely. And when have you felt most known by a leader, and what was the impact of that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one I wasn't expecting. I think deeply about it. Yeah, I don't want to like put people's names out there, but
no, don't put any names.
You know, one particular has been great. It's just always making time for me. So there's both the kind of the organised time where I really feel like it's my space, it's in the diary, but it's that kind of day-to-day time of always checking in, talking about what they know matters to me, remembering to ask me how things are going. Always happy to kind of shift things around. So it's this kind of idea of job crafting, so that I can make the job work in a way that really gives me that sense of purpose. So this leader is very aware that what matters to me most actually is to give these students this great experience at Wellington, whereby they not just perform, but they grow in character, they work out who they are, so hopefully they can then find a path in life to their own flourishing. And so I look at that, this leader just ask me about that. That's what they know I care about, so they always ask me about that and listening. So yeah, it's great.
Thank you so much. Such a lovely example. I'm so sorry to spring a question on you. It makes it more exciting.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about loving young people?
I would love to talk about loving young people. So we really grappled with what word to use, and we're like, oh my gosh, should we be using love? Does it have connotations of, you know, kind of teenage romantic love, or is it a bit soppy? And is this the right word? Because it's deadly serious, and we really, really believe in courage, and we would believe in great, strong leadership. And in the end, we're like, yes, we're going to reclaim love. And it absolutely is essential to flourishing, and it's essential to leadership. And we feel like we want to be really bold about it now. But what we also believe is that it's really difficult to show people genuine love if you don't know them. So like Emmie was describing, if you don't know what really matters to someone, if you don't know what they really care about, it's very, very difficult to give them your love. Because you can get it really profoundly wrong. And also it's quite difficult, and this is where leadership is so difficult, and enabling people to flourish is so difficult, because things change. So you can know someone, but then a month later their priorities have changed because something's happened in their life, or they've just grown. And we particularly see this obviously with teenagers, absolutely. So it's really a continuous process of really trying to keep knowing people, because once you know them really well, once you understand them, then you can show them your love, because otherwise it can be a bit misdirected, and not intentionally at all, but you could maybe suffocate someone if you didn't know that autonomy was a value for them, would be an example. And people like to be shown compassion, for example, in very different ways, and support means very different things to different people. But what's the research say, Emmie, on love?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of research on kind of this whole area of compassion. There's a really kind of quite fun book called Compassionomics, looking at economics of compassion and what difference it makes. And they've done lots of research in the health sector. There's a TED talk called How 40 Seconds Can Save a Life, and just the difference it actually makes when we genuinely care about people. There's lots of kind of interesting in education on this, and actually how much it makes a difference to students' performance when they feel that you genuinely care about them as a person and you're not just doing this as a job. So I think showing compassion makes an enormous difference. We both quite like the research at Adam Grant at Wharton Business School, who looks at kind of givers and takers and whether kind of who succeeds in life. Is it the people who kind of give, or do you end up giving too much, and should you be kind of taking more? And very much comes out with the evidence that in the long run, it is those who kind of give who succeed, and who also bring others up with them. You don't have to be scared about kind of being too compassionate, about being too much of a giver, that maybe, you know, you'll be seen as soft, that you won't be a good leader. Actually, you know, giving is definitely kind of the way forward. But I also love the research by Emmie Edmondson. So she's done a lot of research on this whole area of psychological safety, which I think kind of one part of kind of this love is having the courage to be fearless, to be authentic, to be vulnerable, and to create cultures where people can fail, where they can be vulnerable, where they can turn up and be their true selves, where they can question you as a leader. I don't think you can be loving if you're not brave, and if you don't kind of create those climates for people to, say who they are and kind of sometimes tell you that you're wrong.
Absolutely. And when we don't do that, it's really, really problematic, isn't it? So, I mean, particularly in a school environment, you absolutely have to have that culture because of safeguarding, and because people have got to be able to say if something is going wrong to keep the students safe. But do you want to tell us about another example of where it went wrong, where there wasn't that psychological safety?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of kind of famous examples, but there was a particular kind of space mission in kind of 2003, which you may have heard of, which was a disaster. Kind of, the rocket went up, and when it came back, it exploded and the astronauts died. But in terms of this research, what was interesting was that somebody knew there was a problem with it. Somebody kind of lower down at NASA had seen it kind of take off, had seen something break on the wing, had reported it in, and had not been listened to. So they tried to say it's a problem, but they weren't given access to the kind of the high definition recordings to have a look at it. They went to a meeting, asked their boss to present it. The boss kind of mentioned it was dismissed, and that person kind of sat on the edge of the meeting and didn't feel they had the voice to say anything. We don't know if they could have actually, in the end, saved the mission, but there's a chance they could have.
Yeah.
And so afterwards, there was this big review, and kind of really said this wasn't a safe culture. People weren't allowed to question. They weren't allowed to say something higher than them was wrong. And that's what happens. Fearless organisations, people get hurt.
Yes.
And fearful organisations, whereas if we can make an organisation fearless, it has the opposite effect. And there's lots of nice examples of things like Pixar, when they create their movies, and kind of they really are quite ruthless into kind of tearing them apart, but everyone feels safe to do that because they know it's kind of this greater purpose and their values and their different roles. So yeah, I think it's a great way for us to show love, is to create these kind of safe spaces for them.
Definitely. And once you know your people, and once you've shown them love, what can be next?
Yeah. So, and this goes back to what you're saying about flourishing purpose. I think I love the quote by Dan Pink that we are purpose maximizers, not profit maximizers. I think we all want to make a difference with our lives. Not many of us want to get to the end and look back and be like, yeah, I made loads of money. That might be part of it. I think most of us actually want to contribute and feel we make a difference. And so we've got to help people connect to their own individual sense of purpose and vision, and then hopefully build that kind of corporately. And I think that links kind of to achieve that along the way. We also have to empower people.
Yes.
We can't just tell them what to do to deliver our purpose, our vision. It's got to be helping them build this collective vision and empowering them to do it, and then celebrating along the way and saying thank you.
Definitely. And so that really kind of sums up pretty much what we wanted to talk to you about this evening. So basically, we think flourishing is intrinsically fundamental to human life. It's an amazing thing, full stop. You need no more. But it also really, really improves performance. And so it's valuable from that sense as well. So it's intrinsically and extrinsically valuable. If as a leader, whether that's as a parent, just a member of the community, a young person or a teacher, or whatever your role is, or a leader within your organisation, if you want to maximise flourishing, then we would love for you to really know your people, to love them. And once you've done that, then you'll be able to inspire them to be the very best versions of themselves and to flourish. And that is the end of our opening remarks. Would anyone like to ask any questions?
But something comes to mind, maybe not a question, but it's about loving. And it is a very key word, and it has different connotations for different people. But I think you have to enable yourself to flourish by loving yourself first.
Yes.
Because you can't enable anybody else. If you can't get your own house in order,
Yes.
you're never going to get anybody else's house in order.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a resentment when you try to do something if you haven't taken that first step of looking in the mirror saying, who am I and how do I work and what do I do?
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And
So
yeah, I
it's
really.
great to build teams.
Yeah.
You know, and if you really do engage with yourself in a really strong, intimate way,
Yeah.
you really do love yourself, you can then provide people with a platform. But
Yes.
you also don't want to, I think, influence the way they need to operate.
Yes.
You want them to operate within their own sphere and maybe grow stronger by recognizing that you might have something more than they do and they would like it. So and that's how teams get built, in my opinion, and that's what I've developed with teams of people I work with.
Definitely. So definitely know yourself, love yourself in order that you can.
And seriously love yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, not so long ago, I did something with some children, teenagers who were all wanting to be professional sports people, and they were all on the first or second rung of the ladder. And I was in a group meeting, and I was asked specifically to ask them some quite difficult questions
Yes.
to come along. So when everybody finished talking, I just said to the group, I said, okay, so what do you do first thing in the morning? And they all looked at me and said, get up and brush your teeth and go to breakfast. I said, no, what do you really do for you first thing in the morning? And none of them could give me a clue as to what that actually was. So they said, so what would you think we should be doing? I said, well, I think the most helpful thing is to go and look at yourself, probably start naked in the mirror, nobody else around, and ask what sort of a day you want to have today. But look at yourself in the eyes and do it. And ignore everything else. And they said, and then what? So I said, well, do you want to have a sunny day? Do you want to have a cloudy day? So it comes back to climate and change and, you know, what do I want to really give to me today? And once you can answer that, get ready for work, get ready for breakfast, get whatever you do, because then you've engaged with what you want to do for your day. And they all took it on board, and, you know, and 10 years later, I'm getting phone calls from them saying, you know, I still do this on a regular basis, not every day, but every other week maybe, and it's really good. It really brings me back to Mother Earth and grounds me. And some of them are world-class players these days. They're extraordinary. Yeah. But it's just, I think it's what I do for me, is I look at myself and say, what's all the day well? And if I want a miserable day, I'll have a miserable day.
Yeah, I love it, Hugh. Actually, do you mind if there's a quote that I was going to read out that actually just reminded me of that I was looking at earlier, which is from a book called The Joy of Leadership by Tal Ben-Shahar and Angus Ridgway. And actually, it's in a section that we wrote on putting your own oxygen mask on first, exactly what you're saying about looking after yourself. And the quote is, the feeling of being happy and fulfilled and the ability to lead, to inspire others and make a meaningful difference are so strongly associated as to be virtually inseparable. We just, unless we find that ability, as you say, to know yourself, love yourself, be fulfilled, actually we're almost unable to lead because we just kind of cast our own insecurities and shadows onto those around us. Yeah, so I think really agree with you.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
You listed a lot of aspects that lead to flourishing, and you said how complex an individual those would be. Is there some kind of tool whereby people can actually evaluate what it is that contributes best to their own flourishing? Because as you went through the list, I was sort of wondering, think, how does that contribute to my flourishing? I don't know if I know what it is.
Yeah, I love that question. Thank you so much. And there are two that I really like, two measures that I really like. The first one, and I can give you the exact references, is by Sue, Tay, and Dina. Ed Dina is the most famous of those. He's a very famous psychologist based in the States, and they have done the comprehensive inventory of thriving, and I think that one's brilliant. And Tyler Van Der Wheeler, who is professor at Harvard and the director of the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard, he said that that one's really, really useful and probably the best one for looking at individual flourishing. But then they've got a measure as well. So Tyler Vanderweel and his team, they created a measure as well, which is slightly shorter, and that's the Human Flourishing Index. And again, I can send that to you. The thing that Sue Tayandina doesn't include that I think is really, really important is character, whereas Tyler Vanderweel and his team do include character as one of their measures, but those would be my two favourites. The comprehensive inventory of thriving is more detailed than the other one, so it depends really what you would prefer, but I think both are based on superb research, and yeah, they've been validated very thoroughly. So great question, thank you so much.
Would you, for example, advocate for using that with, say, students, actually enabling them to realise what it is that makes them flourish?
Yeah, definitely. I think that would be so interesting as part of a kind of coaching exercise. And so we teach, for example, a coaching wheel, and actually you could have all of the elements of flourishing on the coaching wheel, or they could just do the comprehensive inventory of thriving. There's also a basic inventory of thriving, which is much shorter. So if you didn't want to spend hours and hours doing it, because the comprehensive one has got about 50 items or so, so it takes a little while, whereas the basic one's probably only about 12 items. So yeah, I think that can work really, really well with students, and actually raising that awareness, I think would be a really positive thing. And because we're so often drawn to the to hedonism and to hitting that subjective well-being, but actually, if we're more aware that we need to be working in community, we need to have fulfillment, we need to have meaning and purpose in our lives, and we're contributing something, then I think that raising that awareness could actually increase flourishing. Brilliant question. Thank you so much, Corbin.
And interesting, there was a book that is not out in print yet. I've only got the front cover, but it's out on the Kindle, Measuring Wellbeing. Interdisciplinary perspectives from the social sciences and the humanities. Reasonably non-technical, but certainly if you're interested in the area, worth looking at. More practically, on the Human Flourishing website, there's an app you can download that gives you activities to try to improve your flourishing, which again might be quite interesting to try with students. And I did some research at another large public school in the UK recently, looking at different aspects of flourishing and thinking about where students experience them in the school. And again, it's great to think about those different aspects of flourishing. Okay, in the classroom, do I help my students find a sense of purpose? I'm in their economics lessons or geography lessons. Do I help them find gratitude in the classroom? Do I help them build those kind of connections with one another? So I think we can be thinking about applying this in a lot of the contexts in which we find ourselves.
I think it's slightly relaxed. Like, you know, work out how to articulate, but it's about relationships being really important.
Yeah.
And inevitably in life, there are people who are going to have trickier relationships with others. And what do you do when you come across, say, a student or someone you work with who you do have a difficult relationship with? And how do you build that love and cross that barrier, particularly maybe they're not responsive to it? What tips have you got?
These are not based on research. This is just my own personal. I think for me that two things that always help me. One is I just think that if they might be my own child and I have my own teenagers, they are amazing, incredible, not always easy, and even when they're not easy, you can't help but love them. So I just think if this is my child, however hard I found them, I would know that there was all this good in them, this hope. And I quite like the concept of kind of living in the subjunctive. We've talked about this a little bit about seeing people not as they are now, but who they could become. I think often when people believe the best in us, we rise to it. And so I think almost to see who this person could be. I think we all do have great worth and dignity as well as the kind of darkness inside of us. So I think anything we can do to see who they could become and treat them like that already probably helps them become that way. Two things I certainly try. I don't know about you.
I completely support both of those. Yeah, absolutely. Just really, really believing in them, and however many times they mess up or you think, oh my gosh, did you really do that? Just be like, fine, we can move on from here. I still really, really value you as a human being. I really believe in your inherent dignity. I really want the best for you. And I think when we come into any kind of relationship with that mindset, I think that we're at least giving the best possible chance of it working. And also being self-compassionate, because sometimes it can be like, oh my goodness, is it me? Am I the one kind of stopping them? But actually giving yourself that self-compassion, and actually, there's a lot going on, and there are huge numbers of factors interrelated and interplaying, and it's complex. So yeah, just being kind to yourself as well, I think is really, really important.
Maybe that gratitude of remembering people who are kind to us when we weren't in a good place, we didn't deserve it, or behave as we should have.
Gratitude's huge, but that's a whole nother story. Lana.
Yes, on the back of that question, actually, we've noticed at school that children, maybe because of COVID or various reasons, are more introverted.
Yes.
To get something out of them as a hard work.
Yes.
So I have a coaching course within Henderson that
Yes.
and we tried the coaching work with the kids, and they were coming back with absolutely different will every week.
Yes.
With the different priorities in their life, it was obviously small.
Yes.
But with different values every time. So how do you know your audience, if the audience is just ever changing? So I'm talking about teenage, so we're 12 to 16.
Yes.
And their priorities change twice a day, maybe, sometimes. So I love black, that's I don't like, I hate black. And so how do you know them? How do you learn them?
But I think that's amazing what you said, because you already demonstrated the fact that you know that they are in this transitional flux time of life where they do kind of like oscillate wildly in terms of who they want to be and what matters to them. I think just knowing that shows a huge amount of kind of care and love for them. And also, I guess you'll treat them in that way of who you are today might not be the same as yesterday, and just treating them with that kind of respect and freedom to kind of oscillate at this time as they discover who they are. I think that sounds brilliant.
Definitely.
Going in the right direction.
Yeah.
Oh, 100%.
Fantastic.
Good. I think that's brilliant. Just a massive, massive thank you to all of you for coming. So grateful to you giving up your evening or watching us wherever you are, whenever it is that you're watching. And yeah, just a massive thanks to everyone. It's been a great joy and really brilliant questions. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I might stop the recording if that's okay. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you so much, everyone, for coming.